From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities and policy and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and back with us again, glad to have him, is our state senator here from Sacramento, Dr. Richard Pan.
Thank you so much.
Glad to have you back.
You.
Also, the newly appointed chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services.
Yes.
We're good. So we got so much to talk about here. We'll see if we can fit it all in 15 minutes.
Okay.
So many plates spinning around here for California right now as we head into 2017, playing offense and defense on so many issues. And California, as I've mentioned to a couple of your other colleagues, California feels sort of like this alternate universe of justice and equality in contrast with but you say it's something different, right?
Well, I would argue that we are the ones living in reality, and there's an alternate universe going on in Washington, D.C., where there's a denial of the facts, denial of what's really going on over there, and that's actually quite disturbing.
Well, I want to talk about that. First, let's actually talk about something that happened this week as we speak, of all the plates spinning. The governor's State of the State address this week, at points fiery and passionate and proud, and he talked about sort of that balance between what's fact and what is not.
Right.
And I know that resonated with you, right?
Very much so. We've accomplished a tremendous amount in California. When you look at what California is doing, when we're creating jobs, we are moving our state forward. We are closing the income gap slowly, but we're making progress on that. We are an economic engine that's pulling America forward. And so the governor made some very important statements about not only, of course, what we've accomplished, but the tremendous importance of living in the real world, of looking at the science and looking at the facts, and facing those squarely and making the kind of decisions we need to move our country and our state forward. And that's something that in this past week, even before during the campaign, but this past week was disturbingly absent in the national scene with the new president.
Well, speaking of the new president, several of President Trump's executive orders have had a direct impact here in California. And let's talk about one of those. Just this week, he issued the executive order to begin construction on the wall or some other artifice on the U.S.-Mexico border and ending the federal funding for the so-called sanctuary cities that don't enforce the immigration laws. Your colleagues, the Senate Dem Caucus, all the legislative Dems have spoken out on this, reaffirming in a lot of ways a legislative stance that you guys came out with towards the end of last year regarding defending the state's residents, preventing mass deportations, setting up legal services for those that need it. Obviously, this is important work, right?
Yes, I stand with my colleagues and with the governor saying we will defend the people of California. We will defend the people of California. And we're going to be sure that the people of California who are contributing to our society, who are contributing to our prosperity, will be protected. We are going to work to be sure that we continue the success we've had in California. Those executive orders to try to defund basically cities in California, we're going to challenge in court. I was glad to see we have a new attorney general who has already spoken out saying we're going to take that on. The people of California deserve equal protection under the Constitution of the United States as all other people in the country. We are not going to be intimidated or bullied by people in Washington from doing what we need to do to continue the prosperity we have in California and ensure that the people of California have their rights protected.
The legislature, though, keeps getting the pushback from a lot of folks out there. It's like, why are you being so negative? Why are you being so defensive about this from the outset, before the man was elected? Why not be a little more negotiable? Why not be a little more willing to compromise and talk?
Well, perhaps he might want to tone down his rhetoric and also perhaps focus more on what the reality is that's on the ground. And again, certainly if there's opportunities to have conversations with the president, of course, we're always open to talking to the president of the United States. But we're not going to give up our values. And we're not going to ignore the people of California who stood up and said, and we saw that on Saturday when you saw marches not only in D.C. but across California. I think they estimated that 1 in 45 Californians stood up and said, we are going to stand up for our rights, and we're not going to let a privileged few in Washington, D.C. take away power from the people and from the people of California.
One element where the impact of things going on in Washington will have a direct impact here in California is, of course, on our state budget. The governor's released the budget this month. He talked about fiscal prudence in light of an anticipated budget deficit. A lot of that prompted, of course, by unknowing where the Trump administration is going to go with federal funding and how that affects California, particularly with the Affordable Care Act and leaving millions of Californians medically indigent for all intents and purposes. It sounds pretty unfair, sounds pretty dangerous. As a doctor, as a legislator, as chair of the budget sub 3, as we call it, what do you think?
Well, we reduced the number of uninsured in the state of California by over half because of the Affordable Care Act. We've also seen the average growth of insurance premiums in the state of California slow during the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Those are both very positive things that moved forward. If the federal government tries to remove funding, which is about $20 billion a year to our state for health care, that means people are going to lose their health care coverage. More importantly, that means people's health is being threatened. That is something that we need to fight back, push back on. They have not yet acted in many ways on those, but we need to be sure that our California congressional representatives, who are of both parties, including one of the leaders in the Republican Congress, understands what does that mean for the people who live in his district and in his state, and as well as his colleagues as well. And so we need to be sure people know what's at risk. And we're talking about people's health. People could suffer or even die as a result of the proposed actions that they're discussing in D.C. And people need to know what the consequences are. And that's the reality we talk about, right? That's why we need to talk about facts and reality. We cannot put people's lives at risk through partisan or ideological policies that are not about trying to improve the lives of people that live in this country.
It's a clear fact that the Congress, and backed up by the Trump administration, want to pull funding for Planned Parenthood and for reproductive health services for women. Again, as chair of that committee and as a lawmaker and a physician, how do you deal with that?
Interestingly enough, abortion rates are at the lowest they've ever been. Planned Parenthood actually doesn't get federal money for performing abortions. So what we're talking about is cutting funding for things like cancer screenings. We're talking about women's health care. So those are the types of things they're talking about cutting funding for when they say we want to cut money to Planned Parenthood. And so we have to think about what is this really about? Should we be going about harming women's health? And we saw again the huge turnout on Saturday. Harming women's health for the sake of pursuing really an ideological objective. They want to single out Planned Parenthood. Well, we should actually be setting standards saying that if people are providing services and they're providing at the appropriate standard in terms of quality, then they should receive the funding for doing that. And if they're not, they're not. But to say that, well, just because you're Planned Parenthood, you can't get the money, that's a political, ideological goal, and that is harmful. We should be focusing, again, on what are we doing to help support women and to improve their health. And we should not be sitting there trying to pick, well, it's Planned Parenthood, so therefore it's bad, and if it's this clinic, well, maybe we're okay with that. Again, this is about basic, women's health that we're talking about taking funding away from. It's not even about abortion. We can have an argument about, funding of abortion, but guess what? The federal government does not fund abortions. So that's not what we're talking about.
Overall, do you agree with the governor's sort of wait-and-see stance with moving forward with the budget this year? And I know you've sort of taken issue or pushed back to the Department of Finance and some of their budgeting errors as we look at this surprise deficit.
Well, so first of all, there is some question about the deficit when you look at what the LAO has said. But the thing I do agree with the governor in many things, and one of the things I really want to look at is what are investments we're making that can lead to cost savings in the future. So I certainly supported the governor in saying we should have a rainy day fund. I've supported the governor in fiscal prudence. And to me, part of fiscal prudence is also looking at what are we doing to invest in changes in our healthcare delivery system and our Medi-Cal program that can lead to savings later on. So, for example, we spend, diabetes. It's a very expensive disease. It affects a lot of people. What are we doing to invest in improvement of diabetes care that also reduce expenditures in diabetes years down the line? right? That's something we should be looking at. How do we then reduce the cost? We're not going to reduce the cost simply by chipping away and saying we're going to cut 10% here on this person's payment or 5% there. It's really about what are we doing to help our doctors and hospitals and other healthcare providers be able to deliver care in a more integrated, effective, efficient way, and how can we give them the resources to make those changes so that when those changes occur, we're going to save money farther down the line when we need the money for other things.
You have a unique nexus here in the legislature, and I keep coming back to this, but it's important to bring it out. As a lawmaker, as a physician, as a pediatrician, looking out for the rights of children, healthcare and otherwise here in California, you have authored legislation here at the start of this new year with this very broad set of goals on behalf of children. The affordable healthcare, universal preschool, parent education, family-friendly business policies. Tell us about this Bill of Rights for Children and Youth, the SB 18. It's very omnibus-y. What do you want to do with this?
Well, we really want to try to prioritize the most important things for children and also look at the evidence space as well. And think about what are we doing to help parents and support families to have their children meet their optimal goals. And right now it's a framework, a lot of intent language, as they say. But we're working with Common Sense Kids Action. We're reaching out to parents across the state to get their feedback. So it's not about Dr. Pan telling the state of California and parents how to raise their kids. It's about parents standing up and saying, these are the things we need help on. These are the things we need help on to better be able to raise our kids and have our kids succeed. And that's what we want to work on, those policies to support families and parents to make that happen.
You mentioned some of that pushback that you're getting, and you've gotten a lot of response on this already from people. And you're out to take people's kids. You're out to control what people want to do with their children.
You know what?
And again, we come back to that discussion about what's fact and what is just opinion and reaction. So,
well, I'm a father. I have two children. Believe me, I have. It takes more enough time to take care of my two kids than it is to take care of everyone else's kids. I'm not. It takes me enough time to take care of my own kids. Let's work on having the state help support parents, support families, so that they can be successful. I know how tough it can be to be a parent, and juggling all the things we have to juggle to help our kids.
We're talking again here, our theme about fact versus fiction or science and fact. There was a rumor that back in the end of last year, Robert F. Kennedy had come out and said that President-elect Trump at the time was asking him to consider forming and chairing a commission dealing with the scientific facts and concerns, particularly related to vaccinations. And I know someday, eventually in your legislative career, you will not have to discuss this issue. But a couple of years ago, you had the vaccination bill, and you had to deal with a lot of the vociferous response on this. And so now you have this gentleman, the nephew of a former president and the son of a former U.S. Attorney General, who's dealing with these pushing back on what we all say are the facts and the science about vaccinations. This isn't sealed in stone at all, but what do you think about the fact that on a national level, this debate is happening?
So it's very disappointing that the president has expressed inaccuracies, misinformation about vaccines, has lined himself up with people who essentially have also spread misinformation about vaccines. So I understand he's met with not only, of course, RFK Jr., who has unfortunately professed misinformation about vaccines, claiming that a substance, thimerosal, which is actually no longer in childhood vaccines, is still saying that vaccines are dangerous because of thimerosal, which is no longer in childhood vaccines. In fact, we have a state law banning it. He's also met with Andrew Wakefield, the disgraced researcher who fraudulently faked data to try to link the MMR vaccine with autism and associate himself with those. This is in contrast to the fact that our President George Washington, our first president, our founding fathers, have supported vaccines. George Washington, as the commander of the Revolutionary Continental Army, required all of his soldiers to get inoculated against smallpox because otherwise he was concerned about losing the Revolutionary War, to that disease. Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson all supported vaccinations, and that we've had president after president saying that we need to use the best science to protect the people of our country, and that unfortunately this president has decided to flirt with conspiracy theorists to undermine public confidence in vaccines, and in other things that are important and vital to the public health of our country. So I'm very disappointed that he's doing that. We're going to continue to be out there to talk about the science, to talk about the what is necessary to protect our people, to keep people healthy and safe. And that's something that we need to continue to push forward on. And I know that not only myself, but many other, not only physicians, but scientists and others are very concerned about this anti-science approach of this administration, an administration that is risking the health and safety of our country and of the people who live within it through embracing conspiracy theories and anti-science positions that are not supported by our understanding of how the world works.
Thank you for this time talking about facts and reality and science.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate it, and we'll have you back again. It's been
thank
great to see you again.
Thanks very much.
Great.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very
Dr.
much.
Richard Pan, he is our state senator here from Sacramento. He is also the chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services. And that is it for this edition of Senate Spotlight. And we invite you to join us next time around as we discuss important issues, legislative issues, and policy with the newsmakers and the newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.